Hey folks, welcome to another Arting Out with Scott Fischer video. Today we're going to talk about my latest oil on copper painting called Koi. The first thing I did was an alchemy breakdown. Alchemy is a free program you can get online. I did a whole nother tutorial on this on Muddy Colors. Check it out. Anyway, it gave me a simple thumbnail, and from that we developed our reference up a little bit cleaner. And from that, we jumped into drawing. This is all still in Photoshop and figuring out how things are going to go. After a few more adjustments, I came up with this Photoshop comp. So it's drawing and textures and all that kind of stuff put together. And then I did traditional drawing. This is actually going to be the thing that I was going to transfer to the copper, but after looking at this and getting a few opinions from some of my peers, I decided it has to go. I need to make some adjustments. So after doing that drawing entirely traditionally here, I had to go ahead and switch gears and go back into the computer and start working the comp some more. And you can see here a series of the changes that I explored. Chief among them is going to be giving her more neck, more negative space around her head, and then increasing the size of the canvas so that I include that bottom foot. We did a whole nother drawing. Yay! So, and again in graphite, just on paper. From that, we got a Mylar copy made, or a laser copy made on Mylar film, and just like this example here, you can iron it on, print it in reverse, and iron it on your surface that you're going to put it down to. It's an old school technique for transferring. Once the drawing was transferred, it was time to get the paint out. I knew I was going to attack this background, and I paint it by hand, so I thought I should go ahead and use oil-based enamel paint. This is the paint that sign painters would use. There'll be a picture of it in a second. And I wanted this because it'll dry super fast. It's also oil. It goes down really thick. I refer to this oil-based enamel as the gouache of oil paint because it goes down so opaque. And there it is right there with a one-shot lettering enamel. There's a few brands of it. Okay, but this is literally, you're looking at 3 days of swirl painting here. And it was driving me crazy. In the end, I wondered if I could have just marbleized the whole entire surface, which I'm certainly capable of doing, but I don't know. I guess I got so entranced by the little swirlies, I had no problem, just zoning out on it for a few days there as we went through it, all the while teasing myself about going forward. And there's the final background. Okay, now we're doing the block in for the fish. For this, I actually switched over to FW Acrylic Ink. I'm working a few colors at the same time. Surprisingly, FW Acrylic Ink sticks really well to almost any surface, including copper. It actually requires some effort to get it off. It's not just going to flake off. You actually got to really put some effort into getting it off. And I was able to do like a gradient. It's kind of a master gradient on the koi fish that were around, pulling from some of the greens and blues that were in the background. Now the fun part, we start engraving. Just about all the engraving on this was done with the carbide scribe, which is just essentially a pencil with a very hard metal point. And I'm working my way around the piece. You can see that I'm doing directional mark making here, something I speak a lot about, but I'm really just trying to pull the form with the lines that I'm making. I'm also constantly considering light and how light would hit this. So if I pull strokes a certain direction and I think of your average lighting coming down from the top, I can imagine what that lighting would be reflecting on as I'm engraving through the paint. I suppose it's almost a scratchboard technique, right? I'm doing an intaglio engraving, which is a very light engraving, through, in this case, the gradient paint that I put down. Templates certainly will help you, guide you amongst the more sensitive areas, so I will use templates quite a bit. That's a great one. You can do very big circles with it. And this is, a very laborious process. I've been painting for decades, and my hand cramps up after doing this for a while. It's really pretty intense work because you're just, you're scratching through metal is what you're doing. Now I'm working back into it with paint, so it's sort of like a subtractive and then additive method. And I'm going in back with the acrylic ink here. And this is me just doing a quick little video of how it's all starting to reflect and to give you guys an idea of how the engraving part of the painting process here is going to bounce that light around in a cool way. But I would say the engraving of this main fish probably took another day, I'm going to guess, to figure it all out. And man, you start to think, oh my God, how am I ever going to get to the end of this tail? But, you know, we sally forth and we just keep going. And you'll find, I find oddly, as I get tired engraving, I will simplify some of the engraving or change it up to make it more interesting. And that variation, I think, is a good thing in art. If you handled everything with the exact same intensity, if this fish were engraved all the way through his body with this much detail that you see around the eye here, it might flatten out the piece in some ways. So when I travel down the tail, you'll probably see, if I actually recorded it, you'll see that I actually simplified it a little bit. You can kind of see up there where the scales are. Then we went ahead and did the little fish down below. Same sort of process, thinking a little bit about shadows, going back in with the acrylic FW ink and painting a few more details. So it's nice. So, you know, for the most part, the engraving acts as the highlighting, right? There are times where if something dark is behind you, that it actually might reflect darker. But now it's time to move on to the figure. And for this, I decided to go to enamel paint once again. This time, though, I created this a variety of flesh tone, and I have a whole puddle of it on a palette to my right off camera. And I'm able to dip into this and do a very crude rendering. So I'm not trying to be super accurate. You got to move fast. Enamel's going to start setting up in 5-10 minutes or so. So you got to move fast, but you have a little bit more blending time than, say, an acrylic. It just goes down, you know, again, super opaque, like a gouache. So this is me really trying to cover the copper because I don't want the copper to show through the figure directly. That actually could be problematic because the light will reflect through and bounce off on the areas that aren't painted over, and it can look unfinished from certain angles. So when it comes to the figure, I try to paint in the silhouette as opaquely as I can. Now, the beauty of copper is light is going to transfer through and hit the copper and actually bounce back out. And there's another shot of the awesome sign painter's enamel that we're using here. But now we're moving on to oil paint. And for this, actually, no, I'm sorry, we're still in enamel at this stage. Even this is being done quickly with the enamel. I'm working pretty fast. You can see that brush moving around. Every once in a while, I'm blending it with my finger real quick. Look at the hand, for instance. It's just really just, this is like local gradient color that I will then refine. There was a sponge a second ago. That was me rubbing medium on top of the image. The reason for that is I have now moved from the enamel paint to oil paint. Just traditional oil paint. Well, actually, this is pretty cool oil paint. This is Gamblin Fast Matte oil paint. And, you know, so you'll see a picture of that in a second as we go through this. But as you can tell by the name, it's a fast matte, so it's a fast drying oil paint, and it goes down without a lot of gloss, which I happen to love for keeping glare down on a piece. And, you know, so I'm just working the figure the way I would any figure. I've definitely got reference for this. You saw it earlier, but there's even more advanced reference. I took more. I had my wife pose. There I'm pulling the digital drawing back out and looking at it again to sort of do corrective drawing on the face. I'm constantly looking at the reference off and just bouncing back and forth. And every once in a while you put the reference away and you just judge what's in front of you and try to make sure it's all playing nice together and looking good, because sometimes we get so consumed with the reference that we don't pay attention to the painting enough. It's a strange balance of like looking at it but not looking at it. But as ever, I'm thinking about mark making here. I'm using cool and warm colors, so the super highlights are kind of warm, and then along her cheek there you can see I cut a little bit more blue into the paint. And you know, main reason for this is that there's so much, there's the Gamblin paint for you, there's so much greenish blue in the background that I wanted to make sure I got some of that into her skin as well, so she doesn't look like she's completely from another world. The brush has gotten smaller. I'm using a liner brush at this point. It's like a little bit of a rosemary rigger brush probably at some point here, finessing the hair a little bit. And then I think for the fun of it, we're going to go down and we're going to look at the fish for a second here, the little fish. And another angle, just trying to get some cool shots of it to see how the light bounced. And that's not enough, so we're actually going to take a little video of it so you can see, again, how the light is playing across the engraving. To this point, you can see that there's a rope there. That rope will entangle the whole piece, and I actually didn't know how I was going to do the rope. I'm actually ignoring it for now and just moving on with the painting. Time to do the hair, at least that's the main part, but I'm also having to work the background a little bit because now where I had been ambiguous, I have to be a little bit tighter to kind of pull out her silhouette a bit more. So I'm having to rework the background, and I'm going back to the enamel to do that and to kind of cut out the figure a little bit more. And this is me going in with a very bright green. Reason for that is I wanted a lot of contrast behind her. So that river of very bright, it's actually a cadmium green, I believe. That very bright yellow green is really contained up around the figure itself. I didn't work it to the bottom of the piece or the top of the piece. I really wanted that to be there to draw your eye's attention where I want it to go. Rendering up the hand with oil paint here. I'm using a tiny filbert on this. Robert Simmons white sable brushes are some of my favorite. And I like the filbert. I used to not like it. I was really a flat guy, but I like the filbert now because it kind of does an instant fade along the edges where it rounds. But you can see much of the work is actually done with those long liner brushes. Very long. But we're back on the filbert here, fleshing out the shoulder, literally. Again, looking at my reference, walking that line where I want some sort of soft edges around her. I don't want to be totally hard-edged, but, you know, I want her to stand out as well. All right, time to paint that upper hand. For the most of this, we just used the long liner brush, I believe. And I have, again, just like I did with the enamel paint with the initial breakdown of the figure, the initial fill of the figure, I have a puddle of gradient already there. All the colors that I need to paint this skin are literally in a pool sitting next to me on the right. I can quickly dip my brush in there and hit the painting, hit it again, hit it again. It allows me to be very reactionary instead of having to stop and mix color all the time. And that, my friends, is the... Oh, not quite. I thought that was the finished art. We still got some going. Oh, look at this. Time to paint the foot. We don't want to forget that. I wanted the foot to gradient as you went down and get more purple and blue. So I went ahead and rendered it up that way. That, you know, those are very different colors than you're going to find up on the thighs and certainly up on the torso. And the idea with sort of a gradient theory that I call it is you just want it to have a nice transition. You don't want it to look like she has a blue foot. You want that coolness to transition up through. Back into the background with the Sign Painter's enamel paint. And here's where I think maybe, no, I was going to say, I thought maybe this is where, yes, it is. I started deciding that violet, that super crazy magenta, maybe was too much. It was just a little bit too crazy of a color. This is a crazy color for me to begin with, but that was a little extreme. So I calm it down here, you can see, just with working blues back into it. And this is the other great thing, once again, about using that enamel paint. Look how this is covering. It's called one shot for a reason, because it goes down in one shot. And I'm able to opaquely bury that intense magenta with one stroke. And man, that sure is helpful. Once again, it's going to dry very fast, so I'll be able to continue on and not worry about smudging my hand through it. Using a maul stick here, this is just a stick to prop up your hand. You can rest it on the edge of your painting or your easel or whatever, many places to position it. And just working that blue that I did put on the top, working some of it down on the bottom of the image now. It's all back and forth. You kind of, with doing a painting, you kind of fill in areas, and then you move on to the next areas, and you fill it in. And then afterwards, you go back and reflect upon it all again and start trying to unify your whole image. Sometimes I think it's like you start by seeing the whole forest in your drawing in your initial concept, and then you start seeing smaller elements, the trees, and then at the end, you go back out and you see the forest again. You can see at the bottom there, a second ago, I painted over the foot, and I knew that from the initial drawing that they were going to have swirls that were going to actually travel over the foot of the woman as you went down there. That's going to start integrating her into the scene a little bit more. And finally, I'm addressing the rope. The final decision on the rope, which it connects to harpoons around the piece, was to use, once again, one-shot enamel, sign painting enamel, gold. So if you ever see a cool hand-painted sign in gold, this is probably the paint that they used. You can see how it's reflecting, but it's because it's metallic paint. But the neat thing for me is it actually reflected differently than the copper. So depending on the angle you're looking at the piece, it is going to react to the light in a different way than the copper would. So that's kind of really neat. And at some points, if something dark's behind it, it's going to look dark. At some points, it's going to look light. It's just a really cool way to kind of get a gradient. As flat as that rope is, it's really just one color of paint, that gold. As flat as it is, it actually looks like it has transition to it because of the way light will hit it. Finally, painting the hair. I'm really under a tight deadline. I got to get this thing to a show within 48 hours. So I used enamel paint on the hair here. One-shot enamel to the rescue again here. It went really fast. I had to work really fast. It dried really fast. But that's really about the most refined I've taken the enamel paint. There's a lot of detail work up in that hair that happened. And there's the finished piece sitting on my kitchen counter. Some detail shots for us. A little close-up. That's a little yellow. It's really not that yellow in person. The last slide you'll see is much more accurate color-wise, but this is what my iPhone was able to capture. Those swirls I told you about to set her back into the image. Baby fish. And there you go, guys. This is the final scan. I'll do a whole post about how I actually get reproductions of these things another time. Thank you guys so much for sticking with me on this, and I look forward to doing it all again.